Welcome to the Battle of the Conferences. Ever wondered which conference can put together the best NFL roster? That's what we're going to find out. We take the best players from every team in each conference, build an NFL roster, and pit those teams against each other in a bracket format. The last conference standing will be crowned champion, which means absolutely nothing. Let the battle begin. Today we find out who comes up against the Big Ten in the final of this entire thing, and it's Pac-12 versus the SEC. And with nothing more to say, let's get straight into it with the quarterbacks to begin with. And for Pac-12, we have Aaron Rodgers out of Cal, Andrew Luck out of Stanford, Marcus Mariota out of Oregon, coming up against Matthew Stafford out of Georgia, Cam Newton out of Auburn, and Eli Manning out of Ole Miss. And I gotta say, with Aaron Rodgers, the number one guy, then followed by Andrew Luck, although both groups are very strong, I feel like a tiny slither of an advantage goes to Pac-12 here, and they get the point. So then next up, the running backs, and we have Marshawn Lynch, also out of Cal, Jonathan Stewart out of Oregon, and CJ Anderson out of Cal, coming up against Mark Ingram out of Alabama, Derrick Henry out of Alabama, Todd Gurley out of Georgia, and Jeremy Hill out of LSU. And again, it's a close one, and it really could go either way here, just depending on how you look at it, but I will just go with the power of the best running back here. So Marshawn Lynch is a better number one running back out of all those guys than Mark Ingram. So another point here going to Pac-12. So Pac-12 have taken a 2-point lead as we come onto the fullback position. And we start with Pac-12's Marcel Reese out of Washington, Derek Coleman out of UCLA, coming up against Patrick DeMarco out of South Carolina and Charleston Fowler out of Alabama. And I think there the point does go to the SEC, and they take their first one. So then we come onto the tight ends, and this is a great one. We start with Rob Gronkowski out of Arizona, then Zach Ertz and Coby Fleener out of Stanford. And for the SEC, we have Jordan Reed out of Florida, Jason Witten out of Tennessee, and Martellus Bennett out of Texas A&M. And the only way to do this, I think, is look at them head-to-head. So Rob Gronkowski versus Jordan Reed, both of them equally as injury-prone, really, so neither get an advantage there. Therefore, Rob Gronkowski wins that one. Zach Ertz versus Jason Witten, I think advantage there goes to Jason Witten. And then Coby Fleener versus Martellus Bennett, I think advantage again goes to Martellus Bennett there. And just running off that, the SEC take the tight end point, although both groups incredibly strong. I think just like a 0.001% better there for the SEC. For the future, Pac-12 is better, but we don't have to think about potential or anything like that. SEC wins. So we're all tied here now as we move on to the wide receivers, and we know the SEC packs a serious punch here. Let's take a look at them first. We've got Julio Jones, AJ Green, Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, Alshon Jeffrey. The star power doesn't stop. Then for the Pac-12, we have Brandon Cooks out of Oregon State, Deshaun Jackson out of Cal, Doug Baldwin, Keenan Allen, Marvin Jones. Even just based on the starters, the Pac-12 doesn't have a chance. It can't even compete with the depth. The SEC has multiple players people would argue could potentially be considered the best wide receiver in the NFL, and they take this point. So then the final offensive position group, the offensive line, Pac-12, Tyron Smith out of USC, David Bakhtiari, Nate Solder out of Colorado, Andy Levitre out of Oregon State, Alex Mack out of Cal, Kyle Long out of Oregon, Mitchell Schwartz out of Cal. A very strong starting line there with some good depth in some positions. Then the SEC, Andrew Whitworth out of LSU, Ramon Foster out of Tennessee, Marquise Pouncey out of Florida, Gabe Jackson out of Mississippi State, and Marcus Gilbert out of Florida. And now I originally thought this point would go to the SEC, but then I take a look at it again. We look at the left tackle position, and they're probably right about the same. The starter better for Pac-12, depth a little bit better for the SEC. We take a look at the left guard position. Ramon Foster, the starter, Andy Levitre, but then Andres Pete is basically competing with Chance Warmack. Center, Alex Mack, Ryan Khalil, Max Unger is as good, if not better, as Marquise Pouncey, Ben Jones, and Mitch Morse. Right guard position, you got Kyle Long and David DeCastro, two of the best in the league, against Gabe Jackson, Larry Warford, Jermaine Ifedi. And then right tackle, Mitchell Schwartz, are probably a better starter than Marcus Gilbert, and then Juwan James and Joe Barksdale's good depth. But in all honesty, I think actually Pac-12 get a deserved point here. This line, when you actually take a look at the players that are there, maybe not as much depth, but the depth is incredibly strong. So as we move on to the defense here, this is turning out to be the closest matchup yet. We move on to the defense at a 3-3 tie. And let's move on to the defensive line here. And the Pac-12 put out a strong one. Everson Griffin, Jarrell Casey, Leonard Williams out of USC, DeForest Buckner, Haloti Nyata out of Oregon, and Brandon Mebane, Cameron Jordan out of Cal. Going up against Daniil Hunter out of LSU, Sheldon Richardson out of Missouri, Trey Flowers out of Arkansas, Geno Atkins out of Georgia, Fletcher Cox out of Mississippi State, Marcel Darius out of Alabama, Michael Bennett out of Texas A&M, Carlos Dunlap out of Florida, Charles Johnson out of Georgia as well. They certainly win the representation award there, but also when you look at it, the right side for Pac-12, potentially better than the SEC player for player. The left side, obviously significantly stronger for the SEC. Michael Bennett, Carlos Dunlap, probably both better than Cameron Jordan, although Cameron Jordan is very good. And then we look at the defensive tackle position. Pac-12, 3 very good ones. SEC, Geno Atkins, Fletcher Cox, 2 of the absolute best defensive tackles in the NFL, although Brendan Meebane, one of the best nose tackles, but the point here does go to the SEC. So moving on to the inside linebackers, and let's start with Pac-12. We've got Vontaze Burfict, Eric Kendricks, Dion Buchanan, Brian Cushing, coming up against Dante Hightower, Alec Ogletree, CJ Mosley, Dion Jones. I just think outright a very strong position group for the SEC and a pretty clear point. And as we come on to the outside linebackers, this is it for the Pac-12. The SEC has a 2-point lead. There are 3 points left to get. So let's take a look at Pac-12. Terrell Suggs, Kiko Alonso, Nick Perry, Clay Matthews, Lorenzo Alexander, Anthony Barr. Coming up against Thomas Davis, Jadeveon Clowney, KJ Wright, Justin Houston, Von Miller, Marcus Golden. As much as they need at this point, they never stood a chance, although they have a very strong position group. Maybe 5 years ago, when a couple of those guys for the SEC weren't even in the league, maybe they could have taken a point, but overwhelmingly easy here to select the SEC with 2 of the best pass rushers in the NFL and 2 of the best 4-3 linebackers in the NFL in Thomas Davis and KJ Wright. Pac-12 have some very nice players there, but they just can't compare. So the outcome may be decided, but we still got a chance here to get the closest match we've seen yet. And we move on to the cornerbacks, and this pretty much just comes down to an age-old argument. Let's take a look though. Richard Sherman, Stanford, Sean Smith, Utah, Marcus Peters, Washington, Demarius Randall out of Arizona State, and Steven Nelson out of Oregon State, up against Patrick Peterson out of LSU, Darius Slay out of Mississippi State, Tyrann Mathieu out of LSU, Casey Hayward out of Vanderbilt, and Stephon Gilmore out of South Carolina. And the debate it comes down to, is Richard Sherman or Patrick Peterson the best cornerback in the NFL? But then again, it doesn't even matter because you got Tyrann Mathieu, one of the best nickel guys in the NFL. Darius Slay, easily, arguably a top 5 cornerback in the NFL. And then the 2 guys behind them, significantly better than the 2 guys behind the starters for the Pac-12. The point here again goes to the SEC, and they're running away with it. And now for the final position group, and again Pac-12 didn't really stand a chance here, with Eric Weddle, the free safety out of Utah, Patrick Chung, TJ Ward out of Oregon, and TJ McDonald out of USC. Coming up against Eric Berry out of Tennessee, Clinton Dix out of Alabama, Reggie Nelson out of Florida, and on the strong safety side, Landon Collins out of Alabama, Keanu Neal out of Florida, and Rashad Jones out of Georgia. They've got some of the best of their best in their positions. Pac-12, again, some of the very good, maybe a 1-point best in their positions, but they didn't really stand a chance, and it started at 3-3 coming onto the defense, and then the SEC just took every single point. And that is it decided. I actually thought it was going to be closer here for this one, and the final ends up coming down to the SEC versus the Big Ten. It's what I kind of expected to see coming into this. Anyway, we move on to the final now. The SEC against the Big Ten, and let's see who wins it all and is crowned the best conference at producing NFL players by some guy on YouTube.